Number 10. Jubilee. Poor Jubilee, so often the butt of so many X-Men jokes, and she's also placed on so many lists of most useless X-Men or labeled as the one who shoots fireworks from her fingers. In all fairness, some of that came from the 90s animated intro where that was literally her introduction. And in the comics, she does herself call them her fireworks. But because of the connotation people have with fireworks, they equate that with being harmless, which is not true in either capacity. Fireworks are far from harmless. Jubilee first appeared in the Uncanny X-Men number 244 back in 1989, and her powers are more than they appear at first glance. In reality, she generates pyrotechnic energy plasmoids from her hands, and they are far from random. She has mental control over them and can send them where she wants and have them explode on command. She can also control the intensity. They can either be bright flashes of light, just designed to disorient, or they can be powerful blasts that can destroy things and cause damage. She can also target the inside of a human brain and cause a stroke, and afterwards, she reabsorbs the energy into herself. It was revealed by Emma Frost that Jubilee actually has a lot of untapped potential and could maybe one day detonate her energy at a subatomic level, which would cause mass destruction. So she's one of those secretly really powerful mutants, so watch out. We're also just talking about her as regular Jubilee, not Vampire Jubilee or Wondra. Number 9. Domino. Now, since the release of 2018's Deadpool 2, more people are aware of Domino and her luck powers. But what are they actually? Because depending upon the writer, even they don't seem to know exactly how to implement them. Domino made her first full appearance in X-Force number 11 in June of 1992, and what her powers really are a subconscious psionic ability to telekinetically affect the outcomes of probability in her favor. So she calls it luck, but really it's her manipulating her own environment with her latent powers. Her abilities are activated when she is in stressful situations, which in her line of work boils down to essentially all of the time. However, in order for these to work, Domino has to actually be involved in what's going on, so she can't just sit there and alter things from afar. She's not the Scarlet Witch. As her abilities also impact her, they impact how she moves in her environment. So that means her telekinesis impacts her reflexes and agility as well, causing her to appear enhanced, and she does operate on a superhuman level because of all this. There have been periods in time where she can control her abilities. It really depends on who's writing her. Number 8. Matter Eater Lad. Now you may be saying, these powers seem pretty simple, he eats matter, it's right there in the name. And yes, that is true. What people have more trouble with here is how exactly would these powers be useful at all? He first appeared in 1962 in Adventure Comics number 303. Because of poisoning on his home world, his people have had to adapt to be able to consume anything, and yes, they were from the planet Bismol, as in Pepto. Hilarious. The thing is, yes, he can eat anything, but when is this useful? Is it for escapes? Can he consume MacGuffins? It's the kind of ability you need to work to get into a story, and apparently most writers felt that way as well, because the character has largely disappeared. Post Infinite Crisis, he's been pretty much absent in the DC universe, and dare I say, potentially not that missed. I'm sure those who do miss him will let me know down below. Number 7. Squirrel Girl. Now let's start off by saying being on this list is not a dig. People get really defensive about Squirrel Girl. Don't even talk about her. Don't even look at her. Who are you to breathe her air? How dare you? She beat Dr. Doom. Squirrel Girl was first introduced in Marvel Superheroes Volume 2, number 8 in 1991, and at first she was a bit of a joke character. There's actually a version that appears in a Tick episode of the animated series from the 90s, The Tick vs. Education, which is a great episode featuring Sarcastro.
I like squirrels.
What?
That's my battle cry. Villain, I like squirrels.
But back to Marvel's version. Over the years, this character has grown to be an established part of the Marvel mythos, and she has been utilized in a variety of ways. So her powers, prehensile tail and buck teeth aside, which are attributes not abilities, but I digress as she did use them as a squirrel would. When she first appeared, she listed everything she could do. She has the agility of a squirrel, the claws of a squirrel, retractable knuckle spikes about 3 inches long, so watch out Wolverine. And while she can communicate with squirrels, which is what most people remember, she doesn't do it telepathically. Instead, she just understands their speech, and they can understand her as well. Over time, she had more abilities added, heightened reflexes, lips that taste like hazelnuts. She was a mutant, then she wasn't one. It's a lot, but now you know. The most important takeaway? Definitely the hazelnut lips. Number 6. Hindsight Lad. This is another one of those ones where it's like, when would you need this? I mean, I can think of one applicable use, and that's if you were trapped in a time loop and he was the one person who remembered it. So Hindsight Lad is Carlton Lefroy. He first appeared in New Warriors Annual Volume 1, number 3. Here's the thing, he doesn't really have powers per se, he's just a skilled tactician, and he was a skilled researcher. So he could look at situations that had passed and be like, this is what went wrong. Like many people, you too could be Hindsight Lad. The reason he's on here is because people think it's a power, like Captain Hindsight from South Park. He flies in as like Spider-Man, you should have changed your web cartridges before this battle. But really it's more he sits at a computer and replays everything like a football coach. Yeah, like Matter Eater Lad, he doesn't get a lot of playtime these days either. Number 5. The Tick. The Tick has powers, he says so all the time. He's nigh invulnerable. But what does that mean? The Tick was created by Ben Edlund and first appeared in New England Comics newsletter number 14 back in 1986. He's a parody-esque superhero and fights crime in The City. And his strength is never fully defined. In the comics, he is full-on an escaped mental patient. In the 2016 series, he claims his strength is 10, perhaps 20 men, a crowded bus stop of men. So when it comes to nigh invulnerability, it means it's pretty much impossible to hurt him. He feels pain, particularly in his antenna, but the threshold is not consistent. He can survive being hit by a train, but depending upon the issue, villains can just knock him out. He also has something called drama power, meaning he gets more powerful the more dramatic a situation gets. And with the Tick, you know it's gonna get mighty dramatic. So in short, his powers being perfectly defined is less important than the story surrounding them. He is more of a comedic character after all. Also, give me your favorite animated episode. Mine is The Tick vs. Comfort. And shout out to Batmanuel and Deflator Mouse, who I love equally. Number 4. Karma. Karma is one of the newer mutants to have been created. She first appeared in Marvel Team-Up number 100 back in 1980. And one can guess based on her name that we're getting into psionic and empathic territory, but it's darker than her name would suggest. Karma can possess animals and people, and she doesn't need to be close to them to do it. So in short, terrifying. She projects psionic energy so that her consciousness overwhelms the hosts, rendering it dormant. Then she can alter their perception or memories, force them to fall asleep or give her information, manipulate their bodies and use them as puppets. She used to only be able to do this for a short time, but she's gotten better. She can now possess multiple people at once. So no, nothing to do with like, oh, they were bad so she causes bad luck for them. No, just pure terror. I can't see these powers being used for good, even on villains. This just seems super unethical, unless all you do is go to sleep. The trauma of her victims must be absolutely enormous. I'm scared of Karma, man. Terrified. Number 3. Cable. So Cable is pretty well known, especially after Deadpool 2 introduced him to the mainstream. But sometimes his abilities get a little lost in his backstory and also his appearance. So Cable first debuted as Cable in the New Mutants number 87 back in 1990. He had appeared as Nathan Summers in the Uncanny X-Men number 201 back in 1986. He is the son of Scott Summers and Madeline Pryor, the clone of Jean Grey. He was sent to be raised in the future and grew up in an era hunted by Apocalypse. His metal arm is the result of a techno-organic virus that is only kept from consuming him by his extremely potent telekinetic powers. He's also a telepath on top of this, and an extremely powerful one. These last two abilities can sometimes be glossed over or utilized in such a way that for new readers it can be mistaken for tech, and depending upon the era they might not be wrong. At first he wasn't as powerful because he was fighting off the virus all the time, but as that receded he's now pretty much on par with Nate Gray. Why this is confusing is that for a time he had lost his mutant abilities and was using tech, but then got his mutant powers back, and this losing and gaining plot has been done multiple times. So this is less a question of how does it work and more a question of what era is it and what is going on. For example, he might have precognition but nothing else, or all his abilities, or he has the virus or he's cured. It's a lot. Number 2. Dazzler. So Dazzler is getting an animated series alongside Tigra, so that will be interesting. Marvel is determined that they will take Dazzler away from her roller skating record company tie-in origins. Dazzler first appeared in the Uncanny X-Men number 130 in 1980, and all of this was supposed to lead to a tie-in film with Bo Derek that never happened. So Dazzler is able to, and I quote, transduce sonic vibrations, which reach her body in various types of light. This means she transforms the energy that reaches her into vibrations, and that can be mechanical, acoustic, or thermal. Although, really we need to reverse some of this. Dazzler utilizes her ability through music, and that quote should really say that all of this leaves her body through light. So she can pull the sound away from a person to recharge herself, and she radiates light at different frequencies as she so chooses. But she has to pay attention, otherwise she'll just be creating white flashes everywhere. So how does she use her powers? Well, 1. Hypnosis. She can create a trance-like state in people, and she has done this at her concerts to make people have a good time, which again is terrifying, and it makes me think maybe she can't even sing. That's so shady. Anyway, she can also upset people's balance, generate laser beams and fire them with her fingers or eyes, create a shield to deflect energy beams. She herself cannot be blinded by light. She can create holograms. See, there's a reason that Galactus considered her for his herald. I'm actually not done, but we'd be here all day. Dazzler can actually be utilized in really interesting ways, so there is potential there. Just they need to focus it because there's a lot going on. I think she needs a hologram of herself that performs while she fights crime like Nightman. I don't know, I think Dazzler could be really cool. I can hear the comments now. now. Dazzler is cool, how dare you. And number 1 in the powers people don't understand department, Scarlet Witch. Zatanna Maximoff first appeared in the X-Men number 4 back in 1964, and at first her powers were pretty vague. They were hex powers. She was a witch, but that was in name only, as her powers were mutant ones. Her hexes specifically affected probability, causing bizarre events to take place, often not in the favor of those she was fighting. Over time she would gain control over these hexes, but she was also trained in this by a witch, despite being a mutant. This way she could now control mystic artifacts, and she learned to wield magic on top of her abilities that she already had. Later writer Kurt Busiek would retcon her powers to say her mutation was that she controlled chaos magic. And then Avengers Disassembled happened, and her powers were retconned again to reality warping abilities. And this is what most people remember, because this storyline was famous and led to the No More Mutants in House of M, the whole 9 yards. However, her powers have been retweaked to chaos magic or mutant magic. The most recent addition is that she was born a witch, and then the High Evolutionary genetically altered her to make her more receptive to magic. So I think why she's on here is clear. It just won't stop changing. It's like Wonder Girl's backstory.
And at number 10, the Sentry. A few of you noted in the comments of our part 1 that Sentry's powers are a little confusing. And fair enough. He's often described as Marvel's Superman analog who has the power of 1,000,000 exploding suns. Vague, right? He's also been described as a character whose full extent of his powers are still unknown, and that's likely because there are so many of them that we've only seen some of them in action a handful of times. So what exactly are those powers? Superhuman strength, speed, stamina, regenerative healing factor, light manipulation. He's completely invulnerable. He has psionic powers. He can fly. He has enhanced senses. He can manipulate matter, gravity, and the weather. He is capable of molecular manipulation. He can absorb and project energy. He can become invisible. Astral project. He's immortal. He's telepathic. He can teleport, bend time, shapeshift, and project thoughts. That's Iron Man's scanners have detected no physical weaknesses in his body, and Nick Fury has stated that S.H.I.E.L.D. has yet to find a way to kill him. He has fought the Hulk to the point where the Hulk has reverted back to his human form because of how prolonged their battle was, and he holds his power back. Spider-Man at one point said he even recalled Sentry fought and stalemated Galactus once upon a time. He can recreate his body after he's inflicted severe damage to it, which includes on a molecular level. What the hell? He once tried committing suicide by flying into the sun and was resurrected seconds later because of that nifty little trick. And where exactly his powers have come from has been retconned a handful of times, so that's real fun. But on top of all that, it gets more confusing when the Void enters the picture. Void is Sentry's other half, whose reason for existing has been altered a bunch of times in the comics. Void was once described as an entity Sentry projects, a dark side effect to having all those powers. He can control darkness and has something called infinity tendrils, which attack a person's mind, pulling up traumatic visions of their past, present, and future, and making them experience them. So in conclusion, yes, his powers can be very baffling, especially if you're not privy to the full scope of what has been depicted in the comics. I don't blame any of you for being really confused. Moving on to number 9, Adam Warlock. Adam Warlock is another character whose scope of abilities are so large that at times it's confusing as to what exactly he's capable of and what he isn't capable of. Now on paper he is capable of energy manipulation and absorption, matter manipulation. He is an expert when it comes to magic, he can fly, he has superhuman strength, speed, agility, and durability. But he has had multiple different incarnations that sometimes vary in terms of abilities. Every time he was resurrected, his powers increased in new ways. He can use something called quantum magic to manipulate quantum energy and create force fields. He can travel faster than light, teleport, detect and produce wormholes and irregularities in space. He can resurrect not only himself but other beings, transmuting corpses. He can resist soul manipulating powers, perform exorcisms, has cosmic and mystic awareness, also known as acute ultra senses, and is able to prevent other cosmic beings from fully understanding or perceiving his next actions or moves. In addition to that, in the past when he's had the soul gem in his possession, Warlock uses it in a way that others seemingly can't, having the power to devolve the followers of Man-Beast into the animals which they evolved from, and even reverts Brute into Counter-Earth Reed Richards. Then, just like the Void, he has an evil alternate version of himself kicking around in the comics known as the Magus. The Magus initially popped up as an alternate future version of the hero who ruled a religious empire called the Universal Church of Truth. Later though, he would come to be when Warlock got his hands on the Infinity Gauntlet, and he expelled good and evil from his soul, with Magus being the corporeal form of his evil. Warlock even became this version at one point when repairing damage to the space-time continuum, so dude has a skill set that is like a ridiculous superhuman toolbox. It's hard to follow sometimes. And at number 8, Tag. Tag is one of those heroes on our list who, after you get a proper explanation of how exactly his powers work, he makes a whole lot more sense. Although the usefulness of his abilities are still pretty questionable. Tag, aka Brian Cruz, is a mutant who can force people to uncontrollably run away from whatever object or person he desires. Like playing tag, except you have zero agency in the matter. This is due to psionic signals that he emits, which can be effective within a 100 feet radius radius of his person. Essentially, he can use this to direct people how he chooses, which yes is a little convoluted, but still managed to appeal to Emma Frost enough to make Cruz a member of the Hellions. The real kicker though is that he yells, "You're it," whenever he uses his abilities, which I imagine would get real old real fast. But he eventually was depowered during M-Day and actually died in a bus bombing, so guess nobody's it anymore. In at 7, Black Condor. At first glance, Black Condor's powers look straightforward. Dude can fly. Wow! But here's where it gets messy. There are 3 Black Condors in the comics, all owned by DC. The first showed up in the Golden Age in 1940, the second in 1992, and the last in 2006. The first one is a mutant who can fly, who, eventually after arriving on Earth X, is revealed to also be telekinetic, although limited on that front, having the ability to mind over matter, which seems kind of like a cop-out really. He also has a ray gun which has never been explained as to how it got into his possession, and it shoots a black beam that can stun a man, or just break a brick wall, implying that I guess it has adjustable power settings. He also is considered to be an Olympic level athlete, but that has never actually been proven. Then came the second Black Condor, who is telekinetic, can fly, is an empath, although that's stated to be limited, albeit never being actually fully defined. And last but not least, we have Black Condor numero 3. This fellow got gypped, having only demonstrated the ability to fly and control air currents, but is apparently an elemental of the sky and earth, even though that has never been seen on the panels. So, at the end of the day, really you could just argue we are ripping on poor Black Condor, but really the alias has a very confusing history. That's why he earns a spot on this list. In at number 6, Rorschach. Controversial pick at this number, but hear us out. Rorschach is a vigilante from Watchmen who has no powers, but often that is confused thanks to a specific detail pertaining to his costume, his mask. So let's backtrack for a hot second. Rorschach is a character named Walter Kovacs who is an analog of sorts of Charlton Comics' The Question and Mr. A. He is a vigilante who operates out of moral absolutism. There is no gray area when it comes to what is good and what is evil as far as he is concerned. But because of this, he believes he must punish evil at all costs without any mercy. He may be brutal, he may be an expert when it comes to hand-to-hand combat, he is a great detective and knows his way around a plethora of weapons, but he does not have any superhuman powers. The only one who does in Watchmen is Dr. Manhattan. But Kovacs does have something neat. He refers to his mask as his face, an ink blotch Rorschach design that shifts and moves. This is actually due to a fabric that his mask is made of, derived from a technology created by Dr. Manhattan, which contains viscous liquids, one black and one white, between 2 layers of latex. The liquids shift in response to heat and pressure, forming symmetrical patterns similar to a Rorschach ink blot test, and they never mix. The more you know. Long story short, don't get confused, he doesn't have powers. But he sure does look cool. And at number 5, Mysterious Fanboy. In a similar vein to Scarlet Witch, who appeared on our Part 1 list, let's talk about this X-Statix member. Mysterious Fanboy, aka Arthur K. Lundberg, who first appeared in X-Statix issue 1 from 2002. Artie was the self-proclaimed biggest fan of the team, who in its previous iteration was created as a means for a reality TV series, with the majority of their members, previously known as the X-Force, dying when a publicity stunt mission went horribly wrong. Artie was put on the team in order to control and monitor his powers, and was even injected with a serum to aid his weak heart in an attempt to prevent him from having a personality meltdown that could potentially have catastrophic results. He is capable of animation. He once summoned an army of zombies, energy manipulation, genetic manipulation, reality manipulation, and he can teleport. While that seems straightforward on paper, in action, and on the panels, it sometimes gets a little confusing. It was also believed, although never seen, that because of the extent of his reality bending abilities, he could potentially manipulate any other power he desired. He would only appear in 22 issues of the comic, eventually dying of a heart attack after an incursion with Razorhead. Up next, number 4, Maggot. Maggot is a curious character. First appearing in Uncanny X-Men issue 345 in 1997, his powers can be defined as psychometry and a slug-based digestive system. Let's tackle psychometry first. It's a power that allows Maggot to draw psychic imprints from his environment, which then replays in his mind's eye. Basically, these imprints show him events that once took place or will soon take place in the general vicinity that he is in. Now onto that digestive system, the mutant ability that Maggot is most known for and named after. His digestive system is not like regular humans. Instead, it has been replaced by a hollow cavity that houses 2 maggot-like creatures, or rather semi-sentient slugs that he has named Eenie and Meenie. Eenie and Meenie can burrow their way out of his torso and attack any solid object at a super fast speed, using powerful enzymes to process and digest that object. This transmits food energy back to Maggot, which supercharge him, allowing him to increase his physical size, strength, stamina, and even sturdiness. His eyes and skin also change color in the process. But here's the kicker. In order to successfully complete this process, the slugs need to return to his body and release what they've consumed within the cavity. As you can imagine, many consider Maggot to be one of the strangest X-Men characters to this day. Moving on to 3, Doop. Doop is arguably one of the most fascinating characters to ever grace an X-Force comic. While he's often been used as a vehicle for comic relief, Doop's capabilities hint to a much grander purpose. Now for starters, Doop is a green floating creature whose origins are unknown, and he speaks his very own language, which in the comics is represented by a unique font. First appearing in X-Force Volume 1, Issue 116, he would go on to serve as the cameraman for the celebrity version of the X-Force team, later renamed to X-Statix. So what exactly can Doop do? Well, from what we've seen, he can fly, has an accelerated healing factor, has superhuman strength and durability, is physically malleable, able to replicate physical objects, and has an extra dimensional void within his body that he can store objects in, and even people. Although from what we've seen, it's implied that time practically comes to a halt for those put inside of him, and they have no memory of it after they've been brought back into reality. He would store his camera equipment in there too, for example. Here's the thing though, in all of his comic appearances, the extent of his powers are super vague, and it's implied that he can manipulate time and space. Time manipulating abilities of others don't affect him. He can also expand his body, stretch out its parts, and do things like remove his eye from his head and then just pop it back in. Arguably, Doop is much more of a mystery than confusing, but for those unfamiliar with the character, what exactly he does is often a bewildering head-scratcher at best. Moving on to number 2, Halo from Young Justice Outsiders. Halo was another suggestion from all of our pals in the comments of our Part 1 list. A more recent addition to the Young Justice universe, Halo is loosely based off of a character from the Outsiders of the same name, but their powers slightly differ, another point of contention when it comes to understanding exactly what it is that they can do. Halo is a character whose abilities are best described as aura generation. Ever since she was resurrected, she has the ability to generate multicolored auras, with each aura having a different power and manifesting in moments of extreme emotion. She can now use them at will, but can only use one aura at a time. Her violet aura is one that allows her to heal and resurrect others. Red is force fields, orange gives her flight, yellow allows her to project energy blasts, green gives her the ability to create holograms, blue allows her to create a bright flash of light that blinds those around her, and her indigo aura is perhaps the most confusing of all. It opens up a boom tube, which is a transient interdimensional corridor used as a means of transportation by the new gods. And here's the fun part. Normally, it's generated by a mother box, which, for brevity's sake, is a living computer. Halo is by no means a walking talking mother box, for the record. But all of those different abilities doing all of those different things, and it all being color coordinated, yeah, can be a little bit confusing at times. And last but not least, Danny the Street. While Danny the Street's abilities may seem obvious, he is literally a living stretch of road, the character is a wee bit more complex than that and often gets written off as, well, simply a street. First appearing in Doom Patrol issue 35 in 1990, Danny is described as a living sentient piece of urban geography, who can magically and also seamlessly relocate himself in any urban landscape at will. This occurs without any disruption to the surrounding environment that he chooses to place himself in. In addition to this, he can freely interact with other beings throughout various forms of visual printing that he can generate within his proximity. He's also been described as a living pocket dimension that can incorporate more and more space as he gains more residence, and can create any conceivable thing, whether living or inanimate, if he has enough strength to do so. And the best part? His most important power is described as being a friend to those who need it most. And he has the ability to let everyone feel comfortable being themselves, which yes is wonderful and noble, but is utterly perplexing in terms of how his existence is possible, let alone how, based on skewed superhuman physics, how we can even make all of those things happen. Perhaps much of the confusion surrounding the how and the why as far as Danny the Street is concerned comes from a lack of the character being fleshed out better, despite a lack of flesh and only, having appeared in 74 issues of DC's comics. So at the end of the day, you could chalk all of that up to advanced forms of teleportation and molecular reconstruction that we just simply don't understand that well. But that still doesn't make Danny's abilities any less baffling.
Number 10, Mr. Mxyzptlk. Mxyzptlk? Now I spent some time practicing how to say this, and I ended up going with the Superman animated series Gilbert Gottfried pronunciation. So this little imp from the 5th dimension first debuted in Superman number 30 in 1944. He's a being who comes over to our dimension to torment Superman, and he can only be vanquished if Superman can trick him into saying his name backwards, which I'm not going to attempt, so it's a good thing I'm not Superman. Now his year of creation places him smack dab in the Golden Age, right before the superhero crash, but he would return again in the Silver Age and has been utilized ever since. Over time his nature has changed based on the writer, from good-hearted trickster to malicious spirit, and back and forth. But okay, his powers, what can he do? Well, this is a question of what can't he do, as very well exemplified by the Emperor Joker storyline, wherein the Joker manages to get his hands on his powers and completely remake the universe. So basically, Mr. Mxyzptlk So basically, Mr. Only Consonants in his name has an unlimited power source, and he can warp reality in any way he can imagine. Now how he does this varies. Sometimes it's just because he comes from the 5th dimension, and their reality is so beyond ours in comparison that it makes him seem godlike. Other times it's using their advanced tech, but it's usually the dimension-based perks. Also, he needs no sustenance. In the 5th dimension, no sleeping or eating. No wonder he has so much free time to torment Superman. I tried, I legit practiced, and I'm still just like blah, blah, blah. Number 9. Dr. Light. Dr. Light, the first one, Arthur Light, even though it was retconned that he was the second one, even though he appeared first. Comics. He first appeared in Justice League of America number 12 back in 1962, and at first he was a fairly standard villain. He would fight the Teen Titans a lot and use light manipulation. The thing that vacillates with him is what type of villain he is. I mean, back when they used him. His character was essentially ruined in Identity Crisis when he was suddenly turned into a rapist, and now a lot of writers don't even want to touch him. So back to his powers. How exactly does he use light? Well, he bends light around him and can generate energy blasts with them and also force fields, and by manipulating light correctly he can fly. He can also create complete darkness, which is a handy trick and I'm sure catches some by surprise because of his name. That's the way. Always keep him guessing. He used to need tech, but now he doesn't because, well, changes. Now what people aren't sure of is what's his upper limit. How much light can he harness and control, and where can he get it from? And the answer is wherever the writers want. That's the thing with light-based powers. These ones can vary a lot. Sometimes they'll be really ineffectual and other times they'll be all-encompassing. Number 8. The Clock King. That's right, the Clock King is on this list. Not the first one though, so Tem, the second one. The first Clock King was just a very punctual person. His power was being super anal, and I can respect that. But he's a villain that often gets forgotten. Now the second Clock King was a temporal anomaly, an actual anomaly, but he wore the old Clock King costume. I'm not sure why, because it wasn't that great. He feeds on people's energy to maintain his youth. I don't know, I just feel there is so much potential for the Clock King based on his name. Yeah, there's not much here, I just want to talk about the Clock King. I mean, no one else does. Poor Clock King. He's a king. Number 7. Dr. Doom. Now some of you may be like, Dr. Doom? Come on, I know everything there is to know about Dr. Doom. Well, we'll see. Now Dr. Doom debuted in the Fantastic Four number 5 back in 1962. Here's the thing, Dr. Doom is a genius and well versed in science, which people remember, but he's also skilled in sorcery, because he has none of that drama about, oh no, science versus magic. No, he's like, both exist and I will master both, for I am Doom. He was also taught by aliens in the art of being able to psionically transfer his consciousness into another with eye contact. And of course then there's his armor. It's ridiculously augmented. It augments his strength, stores energy, food, water, just all of it. Oh, also he has diplomatic immunity. That's kind of a power, and Doom definitely uses it that way. Number 6. The Juggernaut. Now when people think of the Juggernaut, many will think of the memes, the glorious Juggernaut memes. The Juggernaut first appeared in the X-Men number 12 back in 1965, and many forget that he got his powers from the Cyttorak gem, which has empowered him with magical abilities and strength. He is an immortal avatar for that entity. He can generate a mystical force field, which makes him nigh invulnerable to physical damage at least. The helmet is for something else entirely. That's to protect him from psychic attacks, especially from his stepbrother Charles. That's right, Charles Xavier. Over time, he has gained more and more access to the gem's powers, so watch out. Number 5. The Psycho Pirate. That's right, the Psycho Pirate is getting airtime, just like the Clock King. Reppin' the B Squad, or rather, the D Squad. Harsh, some people are gonna be so mad, they're like, how dare you, they're the A Squad. We're gonna be talking about the second Psycho Pirate, Roger Hayden, who first debuted in Showcase number 56 in 1965. The Psycho Pirate played a pivotal role in Crisis on Infinite Earths, and Animal Man after, as well as some minor appearances here and there, thanks to him being the only one to remember the universes as it was before the Crisis. But in the modern era, i.e. Rebirth and beyond, he has played a more average role. So the Psycho Pirate uses his Medusa mask to project emotions at people, in a form of offense-based empathy. He can also intensify emotions people are already feeling. Even if they are just little kernels of, say, hate or jealousy, he can fan them into full-blown flames. For a time in the 90s, he was a psychic vampire feeding off the energy of others. And finally, post-New 52, he is a psychic who can manipulate people's emotions, so essentially the same deal, but no need for a magic mask. Just psychic powers, far more plausible. Except scratch that, he still wears the mask, it just now boosts his latent abilities. I swear sometimes the New 52 just change things to change things. Number 4. The Blob. The Blob first debuted in the X-Men number 3 back in 1964, so he's a classic villain. Now at first glance, some of you may be like, I got this. Huge mass, so he's dense and hard to hurt, but it goes beyond that. He has elastic skin that is harder to penetrate, though it's not impossible, and he is resistant to projectiles like guns, guns, and in some extreme cases has even bounced small missiles off of himself. An ability that doesn't get a lot of airtime though is his ability to manipulate his personal monodirectional gravity field, which can make him pretty much immovable, and the only person who's moved him when he's like this is the Hulk. And by that I mean like outright lift. Other people have found other ways, they've levied pulleys, levers, physics. He's also actually very fast and agile, so don't judge a book by its cover. His powers were gone, but they're back now, so don't worry about it. Number 3. Parallax, or as I like to call him, the "we need to make Hal Jordan sympathetic again" plot device. So Parallax first appeared as Hal Jordan in Green Lantern Volume 3 number 50 in 1994. This was Hal's evil persona after he snapped after the destruction of Coast City and killed the Core, snapped Sinestro's neck, the whole thing. Sinestro got better, by the way. However, when Hal Jordan was brought back to life, Parallax was revamped to be an evil entity, the manifestation of the yellow fear impurity. This was what initially had caused Lanterns, Green Lanterns, to have the vulnerability to the color yellow. This way, it wasn't Hal's fault, he was possessed. So the Parallax entity, aside from being able to possess a host and amplify their desire to cause fear, can also cast fear. Parallax can create both green and yellow objects or creatures. It is also made of pure energy. Parallax also has been shown to be able to be forced out of the person it is attempting to possess, if that person has enough will or is sociopathic enough to just not feel fear. Number 2. Ruby Thursday. She's on here because her very appearance just raises so many questions. How does she live? So Ruby's head has been replaced with a mass of organic circuitry that manifests as a red sphere. She first appeared in the Defenders number 32 back in 1976, and she can shape this head into various shapes and manifest tentacles, fire projectiles, create energy blasts, and get this, she doesn't even need the head to be attached to live. It can be over there and still control her body. The fact that she lives at all is amazing to me. Really, people just enjoy the visual of this character. Well, some people. Others think it's silly or at worst sexist. I fall in the silly category, but if I'll suspend my disbelief for so many other things, I'll do it for a computer head. And number 1. Proteus. I feel like Proteus earns the number 1 spot in most lists he's on just from the sheer terror factor. He's too powerful. Proteus first went by the name Mutant X and debuted in Uncanny X-Men number 125 in 1979. The son of longtime X-Men ally Moira McTaggart, his powers manifested from a young age, and so she locked him away for his own safety and also that of others. More so than that of others, to be honest. Proteus is a being of pure energy who hops from host to host and uses up their bodies in the process. Even though he doesn't have to, he could leave beforehand, but he doesn't. His psionic abilities are incredibly powerful, and he can alter and warp reality on a grand scale, or just for an individual, like what he did to poor Wolverine, turning him into liquid, and then Cyclops threw coffee on him to snap him out of his trauma. Side note, I like Cyclops, and I don't care what anyone says. Proteus also has perfect recall, and on top of all this, he is pretty much immortal as he is made of pure energy. The use of this energy is what burns out the bodies, by the way. All that physics, reality warping, and gravity bending. Oh, he can also possess multiple people at once, like Karma, and transport interdimensionally. It's a lot. Too much even. I don't want to be warped into liquid. He's dispersed in the astral plane right now, but I don't trust it. He'll be back. Number 10. Dial H. Now this isn't one specific superhero, but rather a comic series featuring a rotary device called the Dial. Though in the most recent 2019 series, it is a phone, a rotary dial phone, that allows the user to access superpowers when they dial Hero, hence Dial H. The title is 100% a play on the Alfred Hitchcock title Dial M for Murder. This series first debuted in the 60s and has had numerous updates since. The first iteration debuted in House of Mystery number 156 back in 1966. In it, Robert Reed fell into a cavern and found the Dial. He then used it to transform into various superheroes, and they would change. He wasn't always the same one. And it wasn't until the 80s that it would come into play with existing heroes. Although, there was Plastic Man was a thing back in the day. Also, other people could use the Dial. It wasn't key to one person or anything. The 80s series also had the added aspect that fans could submit their own heroes and villains, and would get credit and a t-shirt. Over time, the series has evolved into an examination of what it means to be a hero, and how finding the Dial impacts people's lives. Spoilers, it's not always for good. The Dial is pretty random with what hero you become, but that's part of the fun. It's the mystery box superhero power generator. I was gonna say loot box, but you don't have to pay for it. Heyo! Well, I mean not with money, but emotionally, oh yes, you pay.
Up next at number 9, Gwenpool. When Gwenpool first hit the scene in 2015, she was a huge success, becoming instantly beloved amongst fans after merely appearing on the cover of Deadpool's Secret Wars issue 2. Here is the thing though, many people mistaken her abilities as those of Deadpool's, with her being assumed to be a female version of Wade Wilson. Gwenpool's name may have hilarious relations to Deadpool's thanks to a goof up from her dry cleaner, and the fact that her last name is Poole, spelled P-O-O-L-E. That was something that was retconned after her first appearance, might I add. So if she doesn't share Deadpool's powers, what exactly can she do? Well, she is a brilliant tactician, has vast knowledge of the Marvel Universe, claiming that she is from a timeline in which she read the comics and is now actually a part of them, plus she breaks the fourth wall like it is nobody's business. She knows her way around a whole lot of weapons, is capable of interdimensional travel, and has a regenerative healing factor, which yes, Deadpool has too, but they're very, very different characters, people. Very different.
Number 8. Jack Hawksmoor. He is a member of the Authority. This is a Justice League-esque team published by Wildstorm Comics, featuring the characters from Stormwatch. Most people know it because Apollo, the Superman pastiche, and the Midnighter, the Batman pastiche, were married. Yes, I said were. People think of other things too, but this comes up a lot. You know it's true. Okay, so Jack Hawksmoor. He debuted in Stormwatch number 37 back in 1996, and has been in the Authority since issue 1. And he can't survive outside of an urban environment, so no trips to the country for him. When in the city, he has superpowers that are tied to the city. These include super strength and agility, just like a city, telepathic control, and he can animate objects in the city, like the buildings. This varies a little bit from city to city, and Jack acts like each city is a unique entity, which no way they are. City doesn't feel like a word to me anymore. He one time turned a city into a battle suit for him to wear. He also doesn't need to eat because he converts air pollution into sustenance, so he must be doing great. He can transport between cities in a mini womb thing. What's the confusing part here is, why does the city do this to him? He was modified by humans from the 70th century, which caused him to have these powers. You have a lot of freedom with this. You can do some zany things based on the cities he's in. My plan is just to go into a field in the middle of nowhere and stand there. He's done. These modifications were made to him so he could fight a threat from the future. A city-based threat, clearly.
In at 7, the Impossible Man. The Impossible Man hails from Marvel Comics, first appearing in Fantastic Four issue 11 from 1963. He is an alien character from the planet Pop-Up, which yes is a great name, and he has shape-shifting abilities. Plus he was typically used for comedic relief, portrayed as a lonely, attention-seeking extraterrestrial who annoyed the crap out of the Fantastic Four. In addition to his shape-shifting and mimicry abilities, he could also teleport and had an encyclopedic knowledge of Earth culture. So if that description is so straightforward, how did he end up getting on this list? Well, it's because of how the Impossible Man was depicted. His first appearance had him visiting Earth on vacation and assuming that he was the most powerful being on Earth after meeting the Fantastic Four. And then the story consisted of him harassing the team of heroes, wanting to start up an Earth pop-up travel agency. His earlier depictions gave him unlimited shape-shifting powers via molecular rearrangement, but due to his use as a comedic character, the extent of his abilities often fell into befuddling territory, and the full scale of his powers became questionable, since he was also able to mimic the likes of Thor and Wolverine. All in all, looks really funny, doesn't seem like much of a threat, kind of questionable as to what exactly his shape-shifting abilities can do. We know he can, but overall, very baffling.
Number 6. Zatanna. Now you may be thinking, are you both okay? Everyone understands Zatanna, a magician, she speaks backwards, but what some people miss out on is the scale of her powers. Zatanna is actually one of the most powerful sorceresses on Earth, and her powers appear to be inherited. What people tend to misuse or not remember is that her magic increases if not used. So if she doesn't use her magic, it builds to a critical point, which can cause an incident. This is why she releases it in such a controlled manner. However, if she uses too much, she depletes her powers, so she has to find a balance. She can also do spells spoken forward and has done so on rare occasions, and she can also do blood magic. Also, the limits of her powers are not fully defined. So have we seen the ceiling? We don't know. She's dangerous. Don't be fooled just because you could temporarily stop her with some duct tape.
Moving on to number 5, Ink. Our next baffling character is a Marvel creation who first appeared in Young X-Men issue 1 from 2008, and his powers are his tattoos. Yes, no joke, this fellow, whose real name is Eric Gitter, gets all of his abilities from his tattoos, his body ink, and has no actual superpowers of his own. Ink has access to a mutant tattoo artist who gave superpowers to individuals via his iconic power symbols that he would tattoo onto their skin. Now, Ink's tattoos consist of a biohazard symbol to make his foes extremely sick, a symbol that allows him to heal others, one that gives him super strength, wings on his back that grant him flight, a nuclear symbol in case he, wants to create a deadly nuclear explosion, a red cross on his neck that gives him self-healing powers, lightning bolts on his temples that lets him read minds, and 2 explosive symbols that allow him to blow up objects and punch through walls. But here's the real kicker, my friends. That tattoo artist, the mutant one, the one with the real abilities, he went into a catatonic state after giving Ink his last tattoo, which was the symbol for the Phoenix Force around his eye. All in all, Ink just kinda sucks. Can't really do anything, and he's just riffing off of this poor mutant tattoo artist, who he then put into a coma. So, yeah. Screw you, Inc.
Number 4, the Silver Agent. Astro City. That's right, Astro City time. I love Astro City and we don't talk about it enough. I will make all of the reaches to get characters on it on this list. So Astro City parallels the different eras in the mainstream superhero development, like actually historically. So the Silver Agent is their big Silver Age patriotic hero. And okay, so Astro City isn't told in order. Instead, it jumps around to different tales from Astro City's history. So the Silver Agent's tales revealed in bits and pieces. So at the start, we know that he was a hero and that the city has a monument to him, as what happened to him is their greatest shame. So the Silver Agent's story involves time travel, and he is traveling back through his own timeline, and each time he gets a little bit more powerful. So to the city, he appears magical and to just be ever increasing in strength, but really he is being charged by the time travel energy as he moves back and forward further and further. He gains super strength, flight, and more, and with his heroic nature he couldn't not jump in to stop situations he saw unfolding. However, the Silver Agent actually gifted his energy to the city when he returned to be executed for a crime he didn't commit, something only revealed after his death, hence their great shame. Astro City is just a ride. Like how the Samaritan has fought his enemy the Infernal to such a standstill that they just go to dinner once a year to see if either is close to coming over to the other side. I could talk about this all day.
Moving on to number 3, the Negative Man. The Negative Man is a character that first debuted in 1963, a DC creation who has eluded fans for years. I mean, it kinda makes sense as to why he's a member of the Doom Patrol. Negative Man, aka Larry Trainor, is an individual who was accidentally exposed to a radioactive field in the atmosphere while piloting a test plane. This gave him an interesting set of powers. Not only was he now radioactive, but he had the ability to release negatively charged energy from his body, referred to as the negative spirit or his soul self. Now this soul self is intangible, capable of flight, it can generate minor explosions when it comes into contact with positive energy, and it also acts as a means of temporal astral projection. It's visually represented as a shadowy silhouette of a human being. The downside? Well, Larry's body is physically defenseless when he is separated from it, so he only uses this ability 60 seconds at a time in order to avoid risking death. Now because of his radioactive nature, he wears special bandages that protect those around him, making him look a whole hell of a lot like the Invisible Man, something that can be slightly confusing to those unfamiliar with his character or the Doom Patrol upon first glance. And that, my friends, is exactly why he ends up on this list.
Number 2, Pure Heart. This is Archie Andrews, from that time when Archie was a superhero. Archie comics do what they want, and in 2019 they brought this series back again. So when Archie is Pure Heart, his powers depend on his pH factor, or his pure heart factor, so he can only access his powers if he has a pure heart, hence his name, Pure Heart the Powerful. Here's the thing, he can lose his powers really easily, just one impure thought. So feeling jealous? Boom, powerless. Accept a gift or kiss from a grateful rescuee? Boom, no powers. I hope they don't do it mid-flight, cause then, well, they're both dead.
And finally, in our number 1 spot, Fantomex. First appearing in New X-Men issue 128 from 2000, Fantomex was a character created by the Weapon Plus program to act as a super sentinel against mutants. He's a very convoluted, complex character. So, Mutant Plus does this. They use a process that uses techno-organic organisms whose living tissue is then fused with Sentinel nanotech on a cellular level. Fantomex is birthed from a woman who underwent that process. His mama went through that and he was raised in a place called the World, a man-made environment for these super sentinels. All in all, it is very absurd and peculiar, as are his powers. His nervous system is referred to as something called Eva. This nervous system can come out of his body, yes, like outside of his physical being, and it develops into a techno-organic flying saucer of sorts that he then has a symbiotic relationship with. When Eva is separated from him and in pain, he feels pain. But when he is attacked or someone or something has inflicted damage onto him, he feels nothing, no pain at all, and can ignore those injuries. Fantomex can also see through Eva's point of view, and can control her movement and reshape her form, or body if you will, if he concentrates enough. If that wasn't perplexing enough, Fantomex has microtechnology laced into his blood, which have some eerie effects, prohibiting him from things like believing in anything greater than himself, like gods or supernatural beings or the concept of love. He also can't see colors, which, I mean, in comparison to all the other stuff, is probably not that big of a deal. Dogs can't see colors, so. He can self-heal, and he can alter his body to increase his strength or hearing range. He can also enter a trance in order to perform crucial tasks, such as perform surgery on his own body. All in all, he is a curious character to say the least, and to not entirely understand what he does, I mean, in my opinion, is perfectly acceptable. And at number 10, Karma. Karma is a character who first appeared in Marvel Team-Up issue 100 back in 1980. She came from Vietnam, having fled the country with her family during the war. She was one of the founding members of the New Mutants. Now Karma has powerful psionic abilities that allow her to physically possess others, meaning she can take possession of the minds of humans or animals. This occurs by Karma projecting a psionic energy surge that overwhelms their consciousness and renders her victim unconscious, with Karma's own mind taking the wheel, so to speak. When Karma is in control, she can do some real damage, having the ability to alter her victim's memories, perceptions, reveal information to her, or have them fall asleep. She can even make their body work as if it were an extension of her own. But if she stays too long with a host, she risks her own personality becoming a subordinate to that host personality, becoming more and more like her victim. After an incursion with the Shadow King, Karma also gained the ability to mentally see through others' eyes, and she can protect herself from the psychic assault of others. Moving on to number 9, Joseph. Joseph, who only operates by a first name, is the clone of Magneto, but kind of sucks in comparison to him. This is why he's a bit baffling to some. He is a mutant clone who first appeared in Uncanny X-Men issue 327 from 1995, but he also died in a battle against the real Magneto and had a thing for Rogue really briefly. Now his abilities in theory should be the same as Magneto's if he's the iconic villain's clone, right? Well, that is not the case, hence why he's on this list. Sure, he is capable of generating powerful magnetic fields, but he can also generate electricity and electromagnetic radiation. And the real kicker? Well, he doesn't have the full range of Magneto's powers. He never demonstrated the same extent of those powers or some of the tricks that Magneto has been able to pull off over the years, like producing a wormhole. He lacks the mental barriers Magneto has, and therefore when he manipulates a ton of energy, he often causes damage to himself. Sucks for you, Joseph no last name. Moving on to number 8, Husk. Many people might assume that Husk has shapeshifting abilities, but that is not the case. The character who first appeared in ROM Annual Issue 3 in 1984 has the ability to remove one layer of skin, or husk if you will, which then reveals a different layer of skin made out of an entirely different composition. So essentially, she sheds one layer of skin, and the layer of epidermis beneath can be something the likes of metal or stone or something entirely different. She's a metamorph who has made her skin into glass, wood, rubber, diamond, granite, brick, and even adamantium in the past. This can increase her weight, strength, or invulnerability in the process depending on the material. So she becomes diamond, she becomes impervious to an extent. Rubber, she gets bouncy. She even once generated heat and flame and has even produced acidic skin. Now aside from being kinda gross, think of like all that dead skin she sheds, it's easy to see why some would mistake Husk for a shapeshifter. Although technically speaking she kind of is, but it's a weird process in which she does it, and very limited, can just be her skin. And at number 7, Sage. Sage is a character who debuted back in 1980, appearing in the X-Men issue 132, and she has a variety of mental abilities that can often be a tad confusing. Think of Sage like a supercomputer. Her brain has unlimited storage capacity, she can recall anything at any time with perfect clarity, and the speed of her thoughts allows her to analyze her surroundings for data within seconds, almost instantaneously. She's like a back computer. In addition to that, she can calculate probability of events based on said data. Sage can multitask too, completing various actions all at once in her brain. And if that wasn't wild enough, she has perfect control over her body because of her superpowered mind, meaning she can recreate any physical actions that she's seen once, as long as they are within the parameters that her body is capable of. She can even see a person's genetic code and read their DNA, and selectively evolve existing genetic traits, which can tap into latent abilities, although she can't reverse the procedure, which has caused unpredictable side effects in the past. She is a walking, talking bat computer. Up next at 6, Lockheed. Lockheed is a literal dragon. Well, actually he is an alien dragon who was Kitty Pryde's longtime companion and a member of both the X-Men and Excalibur teams. First appearing in the Uncanny X-Men issue 166 from 1983, this little dude does a lot more than just your typical dragon stuff of flying and projecting fire. And he is also the size of a cat, which is kind of super adorable. Lockheed comes from a race of advanced dragon-like extraterrestrials who can travel through space via astral ships that transport their essence, which kinda seems absolutely absurd. Now because of his empath abilities, he is able to understand human speech despite not being able to speak it all that well, and is immune to telepathic probing. So he's not just a cat-sized dragon after all. Although, I mean, would you rather have a real dragon or a tiny dragon that was cat-sized? Personally, I would go for the cat-sized dragon. much more manageable and like adorable too. And at 5, Revanche. Revanche, who debuted in 1993 in X-Men issue 17, is one of a few characters on this list whose powers are not only confusing, but so is their origin story. So Revanche's early appearances were plagued by continuity errors in Marvel's comics thanks to one of her creators, Fabian Nicieza, failing to read Uncanny X-Men issue 255. In that issue, the character Psylocke is discovered on the shores of an island by the Hand, whereas in issue 22 of the second volume of X-Men, a handful of issues after Revanche's debut, her origin story contradicted the one in Uncanny X-Men, with the character having come to possess Psylocke's body. Confusing, right? Revanche was said to have been an intuitive empath prior to switching bodies with Psylocke, but after switching bodies she gained telepathic abilities and could psionically generate a blade, a Psyblade that she could use to force her way into other telepathic characters' minds. So essentially she is Psylocke but not Psylocke and used to be an empath and is just a big jumble of continuity errors. Yeah, no bueno. Up next, number 4, Xorn. Xorn is a confusing character to begin with. Is he his own dude? Is he Magneto? Does that mean Magneto can do a bunch of other stuff like manipulate gravity and turn his sun head into a black hole? Lots of questions, friends. So, for starters, Xorn is a dude who first showed up in New X-Men Annual 2001 as a Chinese mutant who had a star for a brain. That's why he wears his little helmet. He ended up becoming the subject of an incredibly confusing retcon, in which he was revealed to be Magneto, who had actually died in the Planet X storyline prior. It made little sense. Then it was revealed in Excalibur Volume 3 Issue 1 that Magneto never died at all, which meant Xorn wasn't actually Magneto, and that led to a whole confusing storyline that featured Xorn's brother, who was kinda like his twin, and overall it was just a big mess. Now that could largely be the reason why so many fans find Xorn and his abilities perplexing. But even when Xorn was revealed not to be Magneto after all, his brother shared very similar powers to him, and was technically the second Xorn, and there were a bunch of major differences. Rather than having a sun in his head that his helmet covered, his brother had a black hole there. I mean, similar but very, very different things. The original Xorn also had healing powers, electricity and magnetism generation and manipulation, the ability to teleport via time-space wormholes, gravity manipulation, telepathy, and was self-sustaining. So yeah, that's a whole lot of powers to cram into one dude who may or may not be Magneto, but probably wasn't. Baffling. Moving on to number 3, Dazzler. Dazzler is often one of the most ripped on mutant characters in the comics, thanks to her publication origins. Initially, Dazzler, aka Alison Blair, was commissioned by Casablanca Records in 1978 as an animated special multimedia cross-promotion called The Disco Queen. Casablanca would bail on the project thanks to financial concerns, but the Disco Queen would live on, first appearing in the Uncanny X-Men issue 130 in 1980 as Dazzler. Dazzler's abilities, which are yet another source of her history of mockery, include the power to convert sound into light beams of various forms and intensity. She is also a trained singer, actress, and dancer, and of course is a highly accomplished roller skater. No joke on that last one. Arguably, the sound conversion trick of hers is the most confusing. She takes sonic vibrations which reach her body and transduces them into light. She has a large range of frequencies that she can do this with all kinds of sound pressures regardless of complexity, dissonance, or randomness being changed and converted, meaning a song and the sound of a car skidding could both be converted into light. So, what do these light beams do? This is where it gets even a little bit more baffling. She can temporarily blind people by creating a pulse of light of several thousand watts. She can create a cascade of sparkling lights that messes with people's equilibrium. She can create a strobe effect, which is no good for people who have epilepsy, and she can create rays of light that use patterns to produce trance-like effects in her victims. Dazzler can generate enough ultraviolet light to melt large metal objects. She can even use those light rays to create holograms and has used light energy to generate flight, which I don't quite understand, but that's okay. The more you know. And at number 2, Maggot. Maggot is a character that we've discussed a handful of times on our channel thanks to his absurd abilities. He has a slug-based digestive system. Oh, and he also is psychometric. Now, first appearing in Uncanny X-Men issue 345 from 1997, Maggot is a fellow whose digestive system is quite unique. Where his intestines should be, he has a hollow cavity that's home to a pair of semi-sentient slugs, or maggots, hence the name. He's named those slugs Eenie and Meanie. Eenie and Meanie can burrow themselves out of his torso, and at super fast speeds, they attack a foe or object with a powerful enzyme, which then processes and digests said object, or person. From there, they come back to Maggot, crawl back into his hollow cavity, and then transmit transmit the food energy they collected to him, which then can supercharge him and allow him to do a variety of things like increase his strength, physical size, his sturdiness, stamina, etc. If the slugs don't re-enter his belly, this process does not work. And in the past, he's actually lost one of his slugs too. He doesn't get another one. He's left with one slug, which means I guess half of the abilities of digestive power with one slug. And finally, in at number 1, Darwin. Darwin is a peculiar character. First appearing in 2006, X-Men Deadly Genesis issue 2, he's a mutant who has reactive evolution powers. When he was first born, his mother practically disowned him because of his abilities, and later he was experimented on by scientists until Moira McTaggart recruited him. So what does reactive evolution mean in Darwin's case? Well, his body automatically adapted to his environment or circumstances, which allows him to survive anything, although the extent of that capability has never been fully defined in the comics. Now in the past, he's gained night vision in the dark, he's grown gills when in water, he became fireproof when his skin was exposed to an open flame. But it's not just basic physical transformations with him. He once converted his entire body into pure energy. He has increased his own intelligence. He morphed into a sponge when he was shot at with a weapon meant to destroy one's nervous system. He has learned different languages by merely looking at them. And when facing off against the Hulk, his body teleported him away from the battle. That last bit is interesting because Darwin doesn't have a choice over how his body reacts. While he may have chosen to increase his strength when fighting against the likes of the Hulk, his body sensed the best means of survival was to teleport him away from the battle. His body is even proven to process alcohol faster when drinking, preventing him from getting drunk. The tough life for Darwin.
Starting off at number 10, we have Magik, or Ilyana Rasputin, named after a really bad Russian guy. Not really. She first appeared in 1975 in the Giant Size X-Men issue number 1. Now she originated from Lake Baikal, Russia, which on a side note, by the way, is one of the oldest, most clearest lakes in the entire world. It's also one of the deepest lakes. It's the 7th largest lake in the world. Okay, a little bit of a side fact there, I kinda like that sort of stuff. Let's get back to Magik. Now Magik, she was taken to the United States of America by a villain known as Arcade. Eventually though, she was rescued and became a glorious member of the X-Men, but her powers consisted of teleportation, where she brings out these little stepping discs which originate from a dimension known as Limbo. Now she's capable of teleporting not just in small regions but across continents, and she can even teleport through space and time. Crazy, I know, which others cannot do. She also has the ability to form her own armor, which when she uses her magic more from the Limbo universe, it just gets stronger. And that's what makes people wonder, is exactly what this universe is and how does she manage to harness this energy? It's really unknown. However, she's a sorceress of the Limbo universe, and that's all we got. As a matter of fact, she ended up absorbing all of the Limbo universe, which pretty much nowadays when she teleports, weird images of ghosts and dragons and other creatures now appear. I have no idea. It's comic books. Number 9, we've got Michael Pointer, or simply known as Omega. He's actually got a few different names as well, I'll get into that. Now originally he was just a simple postman before he found out that he was a mutant. He's capable of not just absorbing people and mutants for their powers, but he can also take on personalities, that's right. His powers have always been extremely strong, that his suit had to be made by Reed Richards so he could regulate his powers. There was also a point in his superhero career where he absorbed the power of 50 mutants and Xorn. Xorn merged with Michael Pointer and ended up killing almost all the members of Alpha Flight. The thing with Michael Pointer is that he does not need to touch mutants to take the power, he could just be right near them. It's kinda silly. And he actually managed to almost take all of the powers from every single mutant on Earth. He's kinda like Superman of absorption, an unstoppable machine with his powers having unknown origins. Yep. I could write for comic books. Number 8, we got Fantomex, which is probably the coolest name of all of these guys, I'm gonna be honest. Now he first appeared in 2002 in the new X-Men series number 128, created out of the Weapon Plus program and acted as a super sentinel for a while. The Weapon Plus program made a group of people or mutants with techno-organic organisms being fused with nanotechnology of a sentinel. I don't really know what that means, but Fantomex was born from his mother, who was one of these Weapon Plus made people, when she was fertilized with nano machines. So his powers, they're interesting because he has a nervous system known as the EVA, which can become external, and when the EVA actually leaves him, he becomes more powerful because he doesn't even feel his injuries. Also, the EVA can shapeshift, it identifies as a woman. Fantomex also even has a backup internal nervous system in case EVA gets damaged. Fantomex also has the ability to go into a state of mind mind and do his own self-repairs. He's an amazing marksman, and his bullets apparently never miss because they are laced with mutant skin. At one point, he was capable of even skewing reality with illusions. Weird. Number 7, we got Glob Herman. Now the coolest guy, but the lamest name at the same time. First appeared in what was known as the New X-Men Volume 2 138. The Prime of Miss Emma Frost, May 2013 issue. Now this guy is made up of essentially living wax. It's known as bioparaffin. And his internal organs are pretty much viewable. You can see it, so you can see his bones. They float inside. It's really cool. Now bioparaffin apparently reacts to heat extremely well, and what we do know that this stuff gives him great strength, and at one point he acted as a major heat shield for the X-Men Academy class when they transported to Sword Base. At one point he joined fellow classmates in the Omega game. Glob ended up attacking civilians and joined in the fight against the X-Men. Now the X-Men succeeded in taking him down by burning off that wax layer. He also is known to flick his wax off in small portions, and besides real awesome strength, we don't really know what else it does. Number 6, Shatterstar. I do like the name of this. First appeared in 1991, a part of the New Mutants series. Now, he still remained very popular. As a matter of fact, he was in the second Deadpool movie. He originated from a planet called Mojo World, which was also a century in the future and in another dimension, and I'll get to that and his powers in a short bit. Basically, he's a genetically engineered individual, and he learned to fight in the arenas on Mojo World. Now, for his powers, he has superhero strength, he can time travel, and also dimension travel. Pretty awesome. He also has extreme senses, keeping him alert, and his weapon, which is a staff, is extremely strong. At one point, he was capable of hitting the Thing into a building, which is like, what? I don't know how you do that. Because he was also engineered, his bones are hollow, so he can go really fast. As a matter of fact, he's expected to be able to dodge machine gun fire at point blank range. He's also extremely intelligent and can learn things like languages very quickly. Number 5, we got Gold Balls. Probably the worst name for a hero, but I mean, let's be perfectly honest, it's self-explanatory. He pretty much takes these gold balls that he can just produce and projects them from any part of his body. On top of that, he can call in an infinite amount of them, and like he can not only shoot them in a straight line, but he can also direct them. Pretty weird kind of ability. I mean, magic balls that can also grow in size. Wouldn't the ladies love that? Yeah. Number 4, we got Blink. Now, a member of Generation X, also in the film Days of Future Past, which is my favorite X-Men film, if you guys really wanted to know that. Now, she's extremely unstable. Sounds like a lot of mutants these days, but oh well. Now, she has the ability to not just teleport herself, but other people around her, which sometimes seems all too convenient. Now, this ability makes her being able to also teleport objects and other things that she can use against her enemies. As for how she does this, we don't really know. Number 3, Forge, a man of great technology, and not just good at inventing things, but he can also perceive mechanical energy in action, which basically means he can look at something and go, ah, that's how you use it. Pretty much, he's a guy that just went to Harvard University for engineering and walked out and said, yep, I'm smart. Actually, to be perfectly honest, it's not realistically through intelligence, more or less like technological instinct. Sometimes he'll make something or figure something out and he doesn't really know why, and then he has to go back and he's like, oh, that's how I did it. On top of that, he's also a user of magic. He uses Native American magic, but simple, he's just like an Iron Man. Just different. Number 2, you've got Dazzler. Now, she is one of the weirdest. I mean, I don't understand any of her powers. I don't know if she's still being made, but either way, apparently she can transduce sonic vibrations. She uses a range of frequencies, she uses the audible spectrum, and uses sound pressure levels. What does that mean? Well, apparently she uses sound and music because music is very pleasing to her. Yeah, that's right. She uses this energy to create light waves that can either put like a trance effect on her enemies. She can also blind her enemies. She is incapable of being blinded, and she also can create holograms and convert this energy to fly. How she does this, nobody really knows. Basically, it's a lot of BS, but it was probably designed by a music student. Number 1, we've got Rogue. I know a lot of you guys are gonna go, come on, really? But realistically, for me, I don't really understand Rogue. I mean, you guys already know a lot about Rogue, so I'm not going to get into the details of her, but we really don't understand her, powers to a degree. And one of the biggest problems is that she's had a different amount of abilities through time, and that's what gets really conflicting. Now, we all know that she has the ability to absorb other people's powers and other mutants' powers, so basically that means no kissy kissy for her. Thank you. However, in some cases, she can also not just absorb their powers, but their memories, their personalities. Apparently, she can duplicate herself into her victims. So I'm like, yeah, I feel like she's just the vampire of mutants, you know? At one point, she got so powerful she could do an instant death touch. After the Messiah complex, she had the ability to control her powers, so yeah, she could get it on and not kill somebody. It's great. She also apparently, you know, absorbed Miss Marvel's powers at one point, and even Wonder Man's powers, which she had a problem doing that in the past. But one thing is, when she absorbs the powers, her victims are sometimes unconscious for a while. And
at number 10, interdimensional travel, the Flash. Complex powers, yay! The Flash's second iteration in the form of Silver Age baby Barry Allen tends to take the laws of science and just twist them, making them arguably inconceivable in our real world, but really neat to see on the panels of DC's comics. Of course, that lends itself to be a tad confounding. Such is the Flash's interdimensional travel powers. Now, according to the comics, the Flash can vibrate his body at a molecular level, which allows him to transfer himself between dimensions. Now, initially this was something that could only be achieved by his cosmic treadmill, but in later years he gained the ability to do this himself by increasing the intensity and speed of his vibrations. Now, to make things a little bit more complicated, adjusting those two factors acts as a means for a lot of the things that Barry can do, but more on that in a bit. Up next, number 9, talking to fish. Aquaman, of course. While Aquaman's ability to communicate with aquatic life has long been the butt of many jokes aimed at the DC's King of Atlantis, there's actually been some major retconning over the years when it comes to the scope of this ability and how it's defined, and just in general how people understand it. It's not just like chatting with a fish. For example, in the New 52, in the first issue of Aquaman, Arthur Curry is chilling at a restaurant when he's mildly harassed by other customers there, who make a point of saying that everyone knows Aquaman talks to fish. Arthur does not hesitate to clear this up, noting that, I quote, "Fish don't talk. Their brains are too primitive to carry on a conversation. I reach into their midbrains and telepathically push them to help me out. Squids, sharks, eels, it's all the same, though dolphins are another story." Now, many of the jokes surrounding Aquaman, primarily spawned from the Super Friends cartoon of the past, were dealt with head-on by Jeff Johns in this series, and it was actually a pretty solid start to the Aquatic Heroes New 52 comic. Now let's flash forward though to the Justice League Aquaman Drowned Earth Special 1 and Justice League issue 11, more recent Rebirth comics. DC started exploring grander concepts here. And similar to Barry Allen's Speed Force connection, Arthur Curry has a connection to something called Life Force, which apparently, according to Scott Snyder, could suggest that Aquaman might have the ability to communicate with all life. And yes, that is still pretty confusing, especially when DC has noted that they haven't changed Aquaman's powers, but rather just want to expand the meaning of them. Right. But hey, he doesn't talk to fish one-on-one, so there you go. That solves that question. Just leave it as the New 52 explanation. I'm sure people will be fine with that. Up next to number 8, one of my personal favorites, Batman's plot armor. Alright, hear us out on this one, my friends. Batman has this uncanny ability to always manage to defeat foes who, objectively speaking, could straight up murder him 5 times over. This is because the Caped Crusader is always prepared. It's like his shtick. And it's his plot armor. Plot armor is a term that refers to a character's unusual ability to survive infinite damage due to their importance to the story. And who isn't more important than Batman? I mean, sure, you could argue Superman, but hey, the duo are pretty darn special and arguably the most iconic superheroes of all time. Anywho, just take a look at Batman's history and it's easy to see this happen. Hell, look at the Tower of Babel's story. Batman, being the paranoid and hyper-intelligent individual he is, literally came up with a plan to stop every single superpowered peer of his on the Justice League team, just in case one of them lost their shit and turned bad. I mean, in the long run, it was a good plan, but still, he's obsessive. And he's also rarely outdone because of that. He's arguably one of the only heroes who are a match for the Man of Steel, despite, not having any superpowers whatsoever. Money and brains don't technically count as a superpower, friends. Moving on to number 7, the electromagnetic spectrum vision from Martian Manhunter. Similar to our previous Flash number, here we have a sophisticated ability that occasionally goes over some readers' heads, and hey, not criticizing with that. Scientific logic in comic books is very different than the lost reality follows, as we mentioned earlier. Martian Manhunter, who will be making another appearance on this list a little later on, is a complex character. Yes, he is a green Martian from Mars, but he also is a being who has a plethora of powers, some of which are a little difficult to wrap your head around. Ja'on Jones is capable of seeing across the electromagnetic spectrum. What on earth does that entail? So, you know how Superman has that nifty X-ray vision of his? Now think of this power as a ridiculously amped up version of that. Nicknamed Martian Vision, it allows Ja'on to not only use X-ray vision but to see infrared, ultraviolet, and microwave wavelengths. While we don't entirely know how this is visually represented to the Martian, since there's yet to be a proper POV panel featuring this in DC Comics, or at least that we know of, let us know if we're wrong in the comments. But we can imagine that it would share some similarities to how the Predators in Predators see other kinds of heat signatures or wavelengths, so hey. Speaking of characters with vast skill sets, that brings us to our next number. And at number 6, Shazam, and like all of his powers. Shazam is one of those characters whose befuddling history often leads to those less familiar with the hero getting confused with the full range of his powers, and also getting him confused with Marvel's Captain Marvel. But like, there is reason to get confused. So for starters, if you are unaware, Shazam used to be called Captain Marvel back when the character was owned by Fawcett Comics, the original publisher who created Billy Batson back in the Golden Age. Back then, he would say the word Shazam and he would be transformed from a boy to a grown man with superpowers. That still remains the same. DC though would eventually buy out the rights to Fawcett properties after DC basically sued them for the character being too similar to Superman. Fawcett essentially went bankrupt. It's actually pretty tragic. Now by that time, Marvel had already published their Captain Marvel, so DC changed the character's name to Shazam moving forward so there wouldn't be any confusion and more lawsuits. If that wasn't confusing enough, let's take a look at the abilities that Shazam has. And also, just to clear this up, when he says Shazam, the magic word, that is also the name of the wizard who gave Billy his powers, but it's also an acronym for what his powers do. Shazam is made up of the names and abilities of 6 immortal elders. First there's Solomon, who gives him his wisdom. Then there's Hercules, who gives him his strength. Atlas, who is stamina and invulnerability. Zeus, which gives him immortality, electricity generation and manipulation, power over lightning, and basically all things electric. Next up is Achilles, who gives him his willpower and superhuman durability. And courage. And lastly, Mercury, who gives him his speed and flying abilities. All in all, there is a lot going on there, and it's a lot more detailed than what we just went through. It would be easy to see how some of those abilities could be confusing to some, especially when there is that common belief that Shazam is basically just Superman but goofier, which he kind of is, to be fair. And at number 5, Green Lantern's ability to create kryptonite. Green Lantern's ring can do a whole lot of stuff aside from creating light constructs. It can store a whole lot of crap, including a whole planet, which is kind of insane. But that's not the ring's ability that we're focusing on today, despite how silly that may seem to some. In 1999's Superman Man of Tomorrow issue 13, Green Lantern busts out a brand new trick that seems like a Deus Ex Machina of sorts. Superman was on a rampage, and Martian Manhunter was like, yo, I'm gonna use my telepathy to read the formula for kryptonite from Superman's mind. Yes, just keep following me here, friends. Then he sent that formula to Green Lantern Kyle Rayner to duplicate as a means of fighting the Man of Steel. Supes managed to evade the attack, but it still felt a little extra, almost devaluing the rarity of kryptonite as an organic material. I mean, if Green Lanterns can just create it, Superman would pretty much be dead if that got into the wrong hands. Just saying. It makes no sense. And at number 4, boom tube creation from Cyborg. For starters, boom tubes are already mildly confusing. Let's begin with that. Boom tubes are an extra-dimensional point-to-point Einstein-Rosen bridge that are typically opened by a mother box and used as a means of transportation primarily by residents of Apocalypse and New Genesis. New God stuff. While often opened by a mother box, there's a handful of heroes out there who are capable of opening themselves, one of which is Cyborg. The New 52 version of Cyborg altered the hero's origin slightly, by having parademons invade Star Labs after Victor was converted into his cybernetic self. After arguing with his father about what he had been transformed into, he then chased down a parademon and saved a woman on the street from it. But in the process, he absorbed something from a parademon, boom tube technology, which allowed him to transport himself or other individuals. All in all, it is an ability that kind of felt like it was tacked on, but hey, not gonna complain. And at number 3, Kryptonian Coma. Talking Superman. Oh, the death of Superman, my absolute favorite story arc ever. That was sarcasm, people, in case you did not pick up on the obvious. Fans of this channel know I have major beef with this arc. Every time it comes up in a video, I go on a tangent about how terrible it was, how it pretty much ruined the concept of death in mainstream comics, and how it was all just a big sham for DC to pull in a bunch of extra dollars. Long story short, and skipping over some of the hilariously bad and nonsensical plot points here, later, Doomsday comes to Earth. He and Superman engage in what can only be called a punching match to see who can punch harder. They punch each other so hard that they punch each other to death at the same time. And both are believed to be dead, but turns out, surprise, neither is. The problem is, a whole long and painfully tedious story event was drawn out of Superman's death, in which a bunch of dollar store Superman replacements showed up, and a side story where Green Lantern turned homicidal was a thing. He was merely in a Kryptonian coma, which apparently makes it look like he's dead with no pulse, no breathing, the whole shabam. So everyone in the story was like, whoa, Superman, thank God you're not actually dead, you pulled a fast one on us with that power of yours that makes zero sense, but okay. Perhaps this number is more baffling than confusing, being something that felt so far-fetched rather than a reasonable plot point. It's all about that money grab. Moving on to number 2, quantum tunneling. We're talking the Flash here, friends. Quantum tunneling is just a fancy name for phasing. It is the Flash's ability to vibrate at such a high speed and at such a high intensity that he can pass through solid objects. See what I mean about those two things being a factor in like a bunch of his powers? And here's where it gets real fun and bewildering. In the New 52 and Flash issue 3, Flash depicts the ability to transfer his quantum tunneling to objects that he touches. He phases a whole airplane through a bridge. Scientifically, we're not even going to try to explain how that is possible. We just know that he becomes practically invisible, and in order for this to work, he needs to calculate the frequency of his vibrations, or else it could get real messy. Like phasing through an object halfway and then, you know, getting dead. It's also a power that has varied amongst different iterations of the Flash, with Barry Allen seemingly having a better grasp over it than Wally West. And finally, in our number 1 spot, the 9 senses of Martian Manhunter. Human beings have 5 senses. Martian Manhunter? Well, he's got 9 of them. Aside from being a concept that is strenuous to comprehend, we can't help but be slightly perplexed by what on Earth, or Mars rather, all of those senses possibly do. It almost seems like a completely made up ability that DC just threw into the character's skill set for the fun of it. So out of the 9, 5 are the human senses that we have, but the extra 4 have never fully been defined in the comics. There is a fan theory that one of his 9 senses is a precognitive one. In Martian Manhunter's early days, the character exhibited precognitive abilities. Regardless, Ja'on's 9 senses tops our list simply because there is no possible way for us to understand them, simply because they've never really been explained to us. And also, humans can probably better sympathize with 5 senses than a whole extra 4 that we don't have. All we can really do is speculate. We know that Martian vision isn't considered to be one of them, and thanks to JLA Year 1 Issue 6, we know that if his eyes were removed, he would still have the other 8 senses, meaning the additional 4 have nothing to do with vision. But thanks to Jack Kirby, there is reason to believe that those 4 senses are chopped up to abilities that he was shown as having in Detective Comics issue 226, in his second appearance ever. Those include telepathy, telekinesis, empathetic precognition, and molecular hypnosis, although those tend to be listed as separate powers of his these days compared to being one of the 9 senses. So all in all, a little confusing. Oh boy.